Hello, my name is Murphy Sinsky, and today I'm going to talk to you about a collection of environmental awareness writings called After Preservation, edited by Ben Mintier and Stephen Pine. I'm specifically going to focus on three chapters from the book regarding the Anthropocene by Earl Ellis, Emma Maris, and Dave Foreman. First off, Earl Ellis's chapter Too Big for Nature begins with him accepting the Anthropocene. He says, "This is the new normal. We live in the Anthropocene, a new period of Earth's history defined by human influences." Essentially, he is saying it is here and it is now. And we start to already see some of his conservationist views. He continues on to point out that we must embrace the Anthropocene in order to make our engagements with nature more desirable and have a better outcome for both of us. This is something that a sort of new conservationist approach, that we must make nature work for us and us work for nature. Earl Ellis is quick to point out that what we are doing is nothing new in our history. As he says in the first sentence, the first step in embracing the Anthropocene is to grasp that there is nothing new about human alteration of Earth's ecology. And at the very bottom here, he says that humans are a niche constructing species. We engineer where we are. As we have engineered the planet, we have become dependent on our engineering for survival. There is no other way for us to live on this planet. We wouldn't be around if not for the development of technology, he says, which is quite an interesting thought, that we as humans have changed the landscape and are now dependent on us changing the landscape. He continues on to discuss sort of the main point of the article and sort of the title, that we've outgrown nature. As he says, in the Anthropocene, the biggest problem with nature is that we've outgrown it. We are too big for nature, and that we must accept this reality, that we must transform nature to survive. This is a very human ideal approach, in saying that we, being humans and nature together, are dependent on simply human action for survival. Instead of focusing on the negative, we must return to the classical spirit of conservation, he says. A new thought from Ellis, as he seems to be sort of this new school conservationist, and yet he continues to point out that we have to have these classical spiritual values, but with a twist. And we also must love artificial nature, something that is created and sort of molded by humans, but is still considered part of the natural world. Moving on, now I'm going to talk about Emma Maris's chapter entitled Humility in the Anthropocene, which discusses the shift in conservation and the need for humility in our preservation. As she points out in her chapter, a newer wave of conservationists are shifting emphasis away from the ideal of wilderness and creation of protected areas and towards conservation all over. This new generation has been criticized for caring only about how nature can survive and service humans, something that Earl Ellis seemed to allude to. However, Emma Maris emphasizes that it is really in the interest of nature primarily, and then humans. She brings up the Anthropocene as the term to describe how our influences have played out, but she also discusses the concept of gardening as a metaphor. Everything around us exists because of human desires. She does point out that some people say that this is an issue, but she has a quick response to this in saying that we are not necessarily in control in the way that we normally think of in control. When we say humans control the planet, we really simply mean that we are the drivers of our influence. Another criticism that Emma Maris focuses on regarding new conservationists is the fact that they tend to focus on new technologies that allow us to do green and be green. She points out that older conservationists, old school conservationists, criticize this as being morally thin, such as Paul Wapner, director of the Global Environmental Politics program at American University. However, her response is simply that this is the old conservation way of making this about us, a lack of humility, by bringing in the idea that we really need to focus on disregarding what can make this situation easier, which would be things like focusing on green technology. We really put the emphasis on how do we make the world a better place, a lack of humility, which is what she's really focusing on in this chapter. And this final quote by Emma Maris really sums up her chapter pretty well. Call it stewardship, call it gardening, call it what you will. It is our job. She's essentially saying that it doesn't matter what we call our action, but we must do something. We cannot sit there and let nature fight on its own. We must help nature fight the situation that we have put it in, because it should not be about us. It should be about what is around us. And finally, we come to Dave Foreman's chapter entitled The Anthropocene and Ozymandias. No surprise, it starts out with a criticism of what he calls anthropoceniacs. He claims that one of the reasons given today for renaming the Anthropocene is that we have no wilderness left, but he's quick to point out that anthropoceniacs have never defined what they mean by wilderness. Dave Foreman continues to discuss this idea of wildness and wilderness, and he brings in two examples, one of them being Aldo Leopold, who said, in any practical program, the unit of areas to be preserved must vary greatly in size and in degree of wildness, as well as Senator Frank Church of Idaho, who, when commenting on the Wilderness Act from 1964, said that nothing could be more contrary to the meaning and the intent of the Wilderness Act. This is in reference to the Forest Service claiming that no lands ever subject to past human impact can qualify as wilderness now or ever. He includes these two quotes because they really emphasize that the words pristine and purity do not have to be used with the idea of wilderness, which is something that a lot of new conservationists, he calls anthropoceniacs, focus on when they claim that there is no more wilderness left in the world.
Dave brings up 4 definitions from wilderness, 3 of which are somewhat fuzzy, but the 4th is not, and these all come from the Wilderness Act. It simply states that no commercial enterprise and no permanent road within any wilderness area designated by this act, and continues on to include a list of a number of non-usable vehicles such as motorized equipment, motorboats, landing of aircrafts in any such area designated by the Wilderness Act. Therefore, Dave is simply insinuating that through the Wilderness Act there are some 109 million plus acres of wilderness. He turns his attention then back to the Anthropoceniacs and claims that they rejoice in knowing that we have control on Earth. There is very little emotion with these people, little sadness and reverence as well. He points out that those who have said explicitly that species have gone extinct, such as the passenger pigeon, have gone extinct or became dead, rather than pointing out that the fault is on the humans. We are the ones who put them to the point of extinction and passed. Dave Foreman finishes his chapter with the poem Ozymandias, in which the message is that nothing lasts forever. We are beginning to believe that we control time without looking to our past. As he says, for 6,000 years, each coming age has puffed out its chest, As each Ozymandias falls to the lone and level sands, a greater and more prideful Ozymandias takes his steed. Um, so, after reading these 3 stories from this book, I have a opinion that really combines the 3. I follow Emma Maris's philosophies very closely in that we need to not only have reverence for the nature, but we need to own our mistakes. We have put nature to its point that it is at now, and we must do something about it. We cannot become sort of passive about this issue. We cannot put ourselves backwards. I unfortunately disagree with a lot of what Earl Ellis has to say, simply because I don't believe that nature was put in place for humans to have some sort of control over. When I think about studying geology for so many years, I always think about how large of a time span geological time encompasses. Epochs are supposed to last for tens of millions of years, and the Holocene has unfortunately only lasted a little more than 11,000 years. And the fact that we as humans are degrading the environment and changing it so much that in 11,000 years we have the need to make a new age for what should take nature many millions of years is quite sad, and unfortunately the situation we find ourselves in, we must find ways to act now and change this for the better.